Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Untold Tales from This Side of Nowhere. I'm your host, Connor Jones, bringing you another story from just about as close as you can get to the middle of nowhere, and that is Poverty Flats, Wyoming. Today, our podcast is sponsored by Basins Market. Basins Market is located in Basin, Wyoming, and it's the only grocery store, so it's pretty easy to find. Basins Market is your destination for groceries, fresh produce, and the best meat department in the Bighorn Basin. Come on in and sample their wide selection of products Monday through Saturday from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and Sundays from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. We're also sponsored by the folks at the Wyoming Welcome Program. The Wyoming Welcome Program distributes both baskets and brochures. The baskets are given to new move-ins to Park County, and the brochures are placed on restaurant tables in Cody and Powell. Both of these items include promotions from local businesses. So if you're interested in getting your business name out there, please send them an email. Their service is affordable and effective, and you can reach them at HaleyJ, that's HALEYJ, at wyomingwelcome.com. And now, the podcast. Well, I'm actually recording this later in the day than I usually record podcasts, and it's because my oldest is homesick with a sore throat and coughing and all the works, and my wife and the other two boys are up in Montana, so I had to stay home and take care of my oldest son today. So it's 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, and I am recording my podcast. So that's a little different for me. But I don't know, I kind of worried that Ruben might get sick when we were on our way back to Powell on Sunday, because even then he was starting to get a little bit sniffly, and I guess that fear nipped me in the bud. And in fact, that's what today's story is about, is, I would call them unfounded fears, but they might not be so unfounded. I don't know. It's up for debate. Anyways, this story's title is Don't Say It, Don't Say It. Here goes. For the first time in living memory, it rained on Christmas Day in Wyoming. I was spending Christmas in Montana with Lily's family and called my dad up to wish him and Mom a Merry Christmas. "Yeah, it hasn't been much of a white Christmas," he said. "In fact, it rained this morning. Imagine that, rain on Christmas Day." "Wow," I replied. "That's crazy. I don't ever remember rain on Christmas. Do you?" "Never," Dad said emphatically. "It's the most bizarre thing." In fact, all of the month of December had been bizarre. Lows barely scraped the 20s, and the highs were pushing up towards 50 degrees. The landscape was barren and brown, and it really felt more like trick-or-treating weather than the Yuletide. "Well, maybe it'll cool off in January," I suggested. "You know what Grandpa used to say. As the days grow longer, the cold grows stronger," Dad quipped. "Yeah, we'll see what happens. I'm kind of missing winter." For anyone listening to this, allow me to caution against repeating that last part out loud. I'm not really a superstitious kind of guy, but I can't deny I am slightly superstitious when it comes to verbalizing wishes about the weather. It certainly seems like the weather is listening every now and then. For instance, on my second hike up Cloud Peak with the men and boys of the fabled Troop 41, we were forced to turn back before reaching the top of the mountain after my buddy Marty Flincherton said, "Gee, wouldn't it be awful if it snowed while we were up here?" If you've ever climbed Cloud Peak before, then you are probably familiar with what we like to call the Devil's Causeway, a narrow strip of precariously stacked boulders that runs for about 100 yards just before you reach the last climb up to the summit. It looks like a giant causeway, with sheer 1,000-foot drops off to both sides. Crossing the Devil's Causeway gives you what I would liken to a tightrope walker's experience, since you have to hop from boulder to boulder with arms extended out to each side, while trying hard not to look down or think about what would happen if you lost your footing and happened to take the quick route off the mountain. At its most narrow point, the Devil's Causeway is about as wide as a 4-door sedan, and at its widest, it approaches the width of a basketball court. This may not sound like a tightrope to you, but you're sitting on your couch on flat ground right now. Just add 1,000 feet of elevation, and I'm sure you'll gain some appreciation for the precarious nature of an ascent up the Devil's Causeway. As we approached the causeway's most narrow point, each man and boy became hyper-focused on the task at hand. For my part, I did my best never to let my eyes leave my boots or the next boulder I had to jump to. The alternative was too vertigo-inducing to consider. I've seen videos of mountain goats navigating sheer cliffs and making incredible leaps from one rocky outcropping to another, but they had nothing on Troop 41. I would leap from one jagged boulder to the next, often pausing for a microsecond before leaping to the next one, mainly because there wasn't enough room on the knife's edge of one rock to get too comfortable, and another scout was hot on my heels. As the wind whistled around us, with the sharp updrafts generated by mountain air slamming into the cliffs and being forced upward, threatening to remove our hats from our heads, we hopped lithely from one rock to another. The sound of a grunt here, or the occasional expletive there, broke up the wind's admonitions to watch our step, and the occasional glance over the edge of the causeway made us focus all the more on traversing it as quickly and safely as possible. Finally, as we reached the end of the causeway and gathered on one of the few sandy patches that existed on the climb up Cloud Peak, we huddled together and caught our breath. The braver men and boys shuffled as close to the edge as they dared and braced themselves against boulders before peering over the edge. A couple small lakes fed by Paint Rock Creek were visible far below, their surfaces glinting with glacial ice. I gave a low whistle as I looked out over the majestic landscape, the craggy pate of Bomber Mountain visible to the north, and all the Bighorn Basin stretching out below us to the west. Up ahead to the east, we could clearly see the top of Cloud Peak, a pinnacle of rock that raked the sky. At that moment, Marty, who was leaning comfortably against a large hunk of granite, said, "Gee, wouldn't it be awful if it snowed while we were up here?" If there had been a rock on hand small enough for the job, I would have clubbed him with it. "Marty," I hissed, "don't say that! It's gonna start snowing!" "Ha ha ha," Marty laughed. "You're superstitious. It's not gonna snow because I said it might." At that moment, a strong gust of wind whipped around us, bending back the brims of our hats and prompting Marty to clap one hand onto the rock he was leaning against to steady himself. "Maybe not, Marty," my twin brother Fred said beside me, "but I don't like the looks of those clouds." Fred's face was almost as white as the wispy clouds above him, his pallid complexion evidence of the altitude sickness that had set in. Scoutmaster Eli Lyman turned his eyes heavenward to look at the clouds in question, and concern furrowed his brow. "You just shut your yapper, Mr. Flinterton. The weather don't need any encouragement from a juvenile delinquent such as yourself." "Let's keep moving," Dad said. "We're almost to the top." Almost as if they had been waiting for Marty to say the word, the clouds unleashed a torrent of snow. "Marty!" We didn't make it up Cloud Peak on that trip. By unanimous decision, we agreed it would be best not to get stuck up there in a foot of snow. And Marty was right. It was pretty awful. If ascending the Devil's Causeway under ideal weather conditions was an adventure, then descending from it in blizzard conditions was a nightmare. The one redeeming aspect of the snowstorm was that you could barely see the ground at the bottom of the cliffs, and that may have been some consolation to Marty as he leaped from rock to rock. He likely set a speed record leading us down the mountain, though his haste may have been motivated by more than just the fear of getting stuck on top of the mountain in a blizzard, since an angry troop of Boy Scouts were hot on his heels. Dad and I should have remembered our experience with weather on Cloud Peak before we tempted Wyoming's weather a second time, but with rain falling gently in Poverty Flats and the trappings of Christmas around us, I guess we forgot the lesson we should have learned on the mountain. As it was, the year ended with relative calm from a meteorological point of view, but the weather was listening. The first signs that something was in the works came when the temperature began dropping steadily in the first week of January. Where we had been seeing highs in the 40s and lows in the teens, the Monday after New Year's dawned bright and cold. "Geez," I grumbled, sweeping into the house with a gust of frigid air. "It's cold out there. I don't know how long the dog's water will stay unfrozen. It's like 8 degrees this morning." As I filled the dog's bowl in the kitchen sink, Lily shivered in her robe and flipped pancakes on the griddle. "Where did this cold come from?" she asked. "It was in the 40s last week." That's when it hit me. "Oh no," I groaned. "What?" Lily asked, her voice urgent. "What's wrong?" "This is all Dad's fault," I said. "What do you mean, Al? What are you talking about?" Lily said, her voice rising. "Whoops," I said, shutting off the water as it spilled over the brim of the now overflowing dog bowl. "The cold," I said, finally addressing Lily. "What about the cold? Honestly, you make no sense sometimes," Lily groaned, exasperated. "The cold is my dad's fault," I said matter-of-factly. "I'm not following." "Well, Dad and I were talking about how mild the winter had been back in December, and Dad said—" I stopped abruptly mid-sentence, not wanting to repeat the winter-inducing phrase to which my dad had so carelessly given voice. "Well, he said something that he shouldn't have said about the weather," I finished. Lily transferred some pancakes to a waiting plate and heaved a sigh. "You mean your dad said something about the weather being too mild?" "Shh," I hissed, pressing a finger to my lips. "It'll hear you," I added in a harsh whisper. "Honestly, you and your dad are crazy," Lily mused. "Imagine being superstitious about the weather." "It's gotten pretty cold all of a sudden, hasn't it?" I huffed, carefully picking up the dog bowl and sloshing half of its contents back into the sink in the process. "Yes, it has, but that doesn't mean the weather can actually hear you," Lily insisted. "Either way," I said, "I think it would be wise not to say anything that could bring on any more of this wintry weather, just in case." I guess the damage had been done already, because our caution did little to lessen the blow. The next day, the mercury barely edged its way over 15 degrees, and to make matters worse, at around 1 in the afternoon, little white flakes began falling from the sky, and they didn't stop. When I came home at 4, the few snowflakes from that afternoon had multiplied, becoming a full-on blizzard. "Lily, what have you done?" I cried, stomping the snow off my boots as I entered the house. Lily was perched innocently on the couch, a book on her lap, and our 3 boys running around the house screaming. "What?" Lily shouted in an attempt to be heard over the ruckus. I hung up my coat and climbed the 3 steps into the kitchen. "I blame you for this," I said, pointing out the window. to the torrents of snow swirling beyond the frosted glass. Lily rolled her eyes, as if she really had nothing to do with the whiteout conditions, and turned a page. "Not this again," she muttered. "I'm not even going to explain," I said. "Apparently talking about it only makes it worse." To be honest, a tiny part of me was actually kind of relieved that winter had finally shown up. Through the months of November and December, I had checked the weather app on my phone almost daily, wondering when it was finally going to get cold. Reading that the daily high was 10 degrees or 12 degrees above average day after day was starting to get to me by the time Christmas rolled around. Everyone dreams of a white Christmas, and the gray skies and brown earth didn't exactly invoke holiday cheer, if you know what I mean. Furthermore, complaining about nice weather never goes over very well either. I mean, how does it sound when you're on the phone with a friend in California and you say, "Man, I can't believe how nice the weather's been. It's disgusting." "What do you mean?" your friend asks. "I thought the weather was terrible in December over there in Wyoming." "Well, it usually is, but it's been so nice this year I'm starting to get worried." "You're worried about nice weather?" your California friend asks, incredulous. "The weather has been terrible here." "Oh yeah?" you ask, feeling even worse. "If Southern California is having worse weather than you are, then you know you have serious problems." "How's it been over there?" Your friend's voice takes on a serious tone, as if he's discussing the passing of a close friend. "Like I said, terrible. The other day, it never got over 50 degrees. I guess a little perspective can help any situation. No matter how warm November and December had been, those days were past. It continued snowing through the evening, dumped snow that night, and flurries were still falling when the baby woke up at 4 a.m. "I hope there's a snow day," I groaned as I lay on the couch with the baby on my chest. Waking up at 4 a.m. and then slogging through snowdrifts on my way to work just didn't sound appealing for some reason. The baby giggled and flopped forward, smacking me soundly on the face. I chuckled and pretended to eat one of his chubby hands. You can't be upset with someone so cute. "Do you plan on staying up, or is there a chance you'll be going back to sleep?" I yawned, and little Freddie laughed and clapped his hands. "That's what I figured," I grunted, shifting to pull a die-cast car from where it had been rearranging the discs in my back. Finally, after nearly an hour of trying to lull Freddie back to sleep, he calmed down, yawned, and lay still. His heavy breathing signaled that he was indeed asleep, and I looked down through blurry eyes at his cherubic little face and sighed contentedly. There's nothing like having a little baby sleep on your chest. Just then, my phone buzzed. I awkwardly fished it out of my pajama pocket, doing my best not to disturb Freddie, and saw that it was a message from the school. "Snow day due to inclement weather," I read. I looked heavenward and mouthed a silent, "Thank you," then carried Freddie into the boys' room, where I lay him gently in his crib. He didn't stir as I eased the door shut and returned gratefully to my own bed. There's something about sleeping in on a snow day that just makes it feel more satisfying than sleeping in on any other day. Around 7, Al Jr. and his brother Ollie got up and made sure the rest of us knew it. Al was actually upset that school had been canceled. I guess that makes sense when you're in kindergarten. I would be upset if an entire day of playing games and eating snacks got canceled. I barely felt the residual effects of my early morning with the baby, and as we happily set about making waffles for a late breakfast, Lily gave me a peck on the cheek. "It's nice having you and Junior home for the day," she smiled. I nodded, glancing out the window at the blowing snow. The thermometer read a solid -20. It was certainly going to be a great day to stay home. Just the thought of going out in the winter storm made me shiver. Yes, I was very glad when I got the message that today was going to be a snow day. I was a very happy dad, I said, turning to look at Lily. She was still in her pajamas, with a robe pulled around her as she extracted a waffle from the waffle machine. It's too bad Ollie slept in this morning. I bet he won't take a nap today. With surprising speed, Lily's head snapped around, and I had to duck as she shot laser beams from her eyes. They barely missed and began digging 2 holes into the wall behind me. Every muscle in her body was tense as she advanced a step toward me, and I stumbled backward in shock. She clenched the waffle fork menacingly, and her voice came out in a low, dangerous hiss. "Don't say it! Don't say it!" I pressed my back to the kitchen counter and stuttered, "What did I say?" "If you say he's not going to take a nap, it'll happen," she growled, her eyes flashing. "Wait," I said, a grin spreading slowly across my face. "You can't be serious. I'm sure what I say has little to do with whether Ollie takes a nap or not." "Just don't," Lily thundered, brandishing the fork like a branding iron. Okay, I said, both hands raised defensively. "My lips are sealed." Lily relaxed a bit and turned back to the waffles. "Thank you," she sighed. "Man," I breathed, eyebrows raised. Sometimes I just can't believe how superstitious some people can be. Well, there you have it. Another untold tale from this side of nowhere. And if you've been living through the winter that we've lived through, then you can probably relate to this story. I was talking to a colleague at work who had just been down to Texas, and she said driving through Oklahoma, they actually had more snow than we did up here in Wyoming. And from what I have seen on the news, the Northeast has been getting an insane amount of snow this year. It's really not going great over there. So, yeah, I don't know. This has been a crazy winter. And my wife will probably make a comment about me making an entire podcast episode about the weather because she claims I talk about it in every single episode. So, if you're listening to this one, dear, I guess this was a podcast about the weather. So, I hope you did enjoy this story, even if it was about superstitions and the weather. And maybe you have a story that you'd like to share with us or a comment. You can reach me at untoldtalesthepodcast@gmail.com or reply on Facebook when this episode is released. And as always, if you could go rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that would be fantastic. It makes our show easier to find and allows us to share it with more people. So, this has been another episode of Untold Tales from This Side of Nowhere, where we work twice as hard for half as much and still find time for the important things, like fishing. See you next time, folks.